Statism is just the modern manifestation of slavery. And whereas the old slavery was very openly just claiming, hey, I own you because I say so, like we captured you or bought you or something, and now you're my property. Now because people wouldn't mostly fall for that these days, they have to use rhetoric and terminology and excuses and justifications that are way more convoluted and twisted and weird. And they say things like, well, now I get to steal some of your money because I'm representing you for the common good and yada yada yada. But it's still, at the end of the day, it's a bunch of people saying we get to take the fruits of your labor without your consent, and we'll pretend you consented by like being anywhere on half a continent as if that's consent. But it's basically just a more elaborate excuse for slavery to dupe more sophisticated human beings into accepting it and going along with it. Slavery is the idea that one person can own somebody else. And all ownership means, whether you're talking about a person or a chair, is you have the exclusive right to decide what's done with that. So if I own my car, I can give it away, I can park it in a field, I can drive it off a cliff, I can sell it to somebody. It's mine. And it's a little bit weird to talk about ourselves as if we own ourselves, but I often use that phrase. It's a little bit schizophrenic to say you own yourself. But I use that phrase because everybody understands what it means. And there are only two choices. There is you own yourself or you're a slave because somebody else owns you, whether it's one person or 50 people or a Congress or whatever it is. Somebody has the right and the final say over what is done with your time and your effort and your body. If it isn't you, that's slavery. My focus is on the mindset of the victims of it, way more so than on the mindset of the perpetrators. Because yeah, there's going to be a handful of power happy psychos, as far as I can tell, till the end of time. That isn't what actually determines what happens. What determines what happens is the mindset of the potential victims. And a thing that I think a lot of people just cannot relate to now is trying to imagine that slaves in chattel slavery, they thought they were supposed to be slaves. They thought they were the rightful property of the master. And to us, from our perspective, we can just go, they can't possibly have thought that. And if they didn't think that, how on earth is, one lazy white guy sitting around in a big house going to forcibly control a whole bunch of like strong, healthy slaves? You cannot control them physically if you don't control them mentally. To me, what is both scary and hopeful is that right now, the same problem exists. It's a different flavor of slavery, but the same problem exists in that the people who are being victimized by authoritarian extortion and domination, they have been taught to believe that it's perfectly fine, it's necessary, it's essential, it's legitimate. This is how things are. This is how things have to be. This is how things will always be. And they have all of the same mental traits that Frederick Douglass, who was a slave, described in his fellow slaves when he described his own process of escaping the mentality. And to us, it seems like, well, this is obvious, but to him, it was like a process of realizing, I don't think this is okay. Like, why do we have to work for that guy? And like, why does he claim to own us? Now, for us living here and now, we'd go, well, that's obvious. Yeah, it's obvious because that's not something we were indoctrinated into. What we were indoctrinated into is be a good law-abiding taxpayer and do as you're told and follow the rules. And if you don't, you deserve whatever the legislation and legislators do to you because you have an obligation. It's the same mentality. And the reason I find hope in that is because if you change the mentality of the victims, it's over. You don't have to change the tyrants. You don't have to overthrow them. You don't have to do anything to them if you can get their intended victims to realize we own ourselves. We're not beholden to these psychos. No election, no constitution, none of their weird rituals actually make it legitimate for them to forcibly dominate us. But it is a huge mental shift that people have to go through, just like it was a huge mental shift for Frederick Douglass to figure out this isn't okay. I'm not this guy's property. I don't have an obligation to work for him. I would be perfectly justified in running away or kicking his butt or something, doing whatever I have to reclaim ownership of myself. But the mental process has to happen first, which is why pretty much every project I do focuses on trying to get the victims of authoritarianism out of the slave mentality. Like you look at every tyrannical regime and you think, oh, the big nasty tyrant at the top. Well, where did his power come from? Where did he get all this money and his tanks and his bombs and stuff? Oh, they were paid for by the law-abiding taxpayers, and the trigger fingers pulling the guns for him were the normal people who chose to be thugs for the state, whether it's this country or any other country. And so it's so hard for people to realize, if they're good people and well-intentioned, that they're the problem. And I'm just going to say it bluntly. If you believe in government and you vote and you believe in the Constitution and democracy, you are the problem, not because you're malicious, not because you're stupid, not because you're evil, but you are absolutely the problem because you've been taught to believe a lie, and all of your perceptions and your words and your actions are a result of you falling for that lie and reinforcing and legitimizing your own victimization.
We learned self-contradictory phrases that we repeat, like consent of the governed, which is actually a logical impossibility. There's no such thing.
Yeah, because if it's consent, then it's voluntary. And if it's being governed, it's coercion. And we're taught these things, and if we think that that's just reality, then you don't recognize it as indoctrination. You just think, oh, well, this is how things are, and good people pay their taxes and obey the law and yada yada yada. And the amount of indoctrination, the amount of the message of authoritarianism is just everywhere, but I don't know anybody who notices it until after they've given up the belief in authority. And then they notice it everywhere. They're like, how did I not notice? It's just, we're just bombarded with it everywhere from all sides, from the parents, from the teachers, from the politicians, from the cops, from the bureaucrats, from the media, from pretty much everybody we know, because they all believe the same status stuff. So we think we're growing up as these, learned, thoughtful, independent thinking beings. And no, we're not. Like, we are massively indoctrinated, which is why it's such a slow, uncomfortable process for so many people to get out of that. Because if you come up to somebody and you say, your view of reality and the world and society is completely upside down and you're accidentally supporting evil, nobody's going to want to say, yep, that's me. I'm the bad guy. I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm the idiot. I'm the gullible moron who fell for something evil. They want to imagine that, well, you're just extreme or weird or something, because I can't be the problem. And the trouble is, until people can consider the possibility that they're accidentally being the problem, they're going to keep being the problem.